All right. So, welcome everybody today to this edition of the Teachers Lounge. It is November 23rd, the day before Thanksgiving. So, we appreciate everybody who was able to come and attend the day before Thanksgiving, especially here. I know in the US, it's crazy, it's chaos, kind of like being in school. But we're going to try to do something fun and have a great conversation anyway. So, those of you who are able to join, we appreciate it. Those of you who are listening to this after we post it, that's awesome too. And we welcome any feedback during the call, absolutely, because we like to keep it interactive. And once we post this video, definitely share your comments, your insights, your ideas, because this conversation is something that we need to keep going. The topic of our conversation today is a big one. It's about how to amplify student voice. All right. But the tricky thing about that is what Jessica and I talk about a lot is how exactly do we do that? And when you talk about you want to hear or amplify student voice, what does that mean? How big or how small do you want to go? And should you limit that? So that's kind of where we want to start today. If anybody on the call wants to talk about what does that mean when you say first that you want student voice, but then how do you amplify that? How do you make it bigger? So that's a really big question that we're going to try to break down in about 40 minutes. So, does anybody want to start with what they think student voice might be? Oh, you're going to make me start?
I won't let you hang. I'll jump in here because I love student voice. And being a government teacher and a history teacher, I think student voice is integral to the running of my classroom, is that students need to be able to, first of all, feel comfortable to express themselves at all times and never feel that it's not a safe environment for their opinion or whatever their thoughts are. So I think that's one of the key pieces to starting a classroom is coming into a classroom in the beginning of the year and setting the tone of being a comfortable place that you can be yourself. And so that's not necessarily easy for first year teachers or beginning teachers that are still, nervous and have that nervous energy of what to anticipate. But it's something to keep in mind as you grow into your classroom experience is how are you setting the tone for your classroom? How are you modeling the idea that all voices are welcome and that you're free to be yourself? And then I think after that's established, it kind of rolls over in the way that you conduct your class. And this is where I personally get into why I love Agile in the classroom so much is because if you are sitting there dictating and talking constantly like I am right now, and you're pushing your feelings onto everyone else, then that becomes the accepted way that you're communicating with each other is that you're either nodding or you're not. Most students are not going to be like, no, you're wrong. It's about being quiet. It's about the long pauses. It's about learning how to ask prompt questions and let them linger. And that's how you start to scaffold that kind of environment where student voices are protected and safe. And then they know that you value them by the way that you actively listen to them so that when they're talking, you're not taking attendance and you're not looking over here and you're not talking to Johnny in the back row, but that your eyes are forward, you're engaging, and then you say something for the kids in the back. So, Emily, what I'm hearing you say is blah, 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 blah. Is that correct? Would you like to elaborate? Does anybody agree or disagree respectfully? It's those kinds of things that start to set up student voice. Other thoughts?
For me, it's about breaking down the perceived like power dynamic of the teacher is the one that knows everything and is the ultimate authority on all the questions and and so changing that into where you can have like a conversation as an equal to the teacher, where you're able to discuss things and ponder things, and not feel like you're gonna have the wrong answer, um, but also like starting to give a bit more agency to the student, and so they feel like, oh well, I can do something about this. I can speak up. I can say something. I can start. taking responsibility of my side of the things. And so allowing them and to like empowering them to speak up and say things.
I totally agree with Samuel, and I'll jump in and build on that here, which is whenever you see this sort of there's sort of two different dynamics that you can have. One is the teachers like asking questions and then clearly like jumping on like the student that kind of got it right, like and brought out the right answer. And the other ones, they're like, okay, I listened to your answer, but it wasn't what I was looking for. So I'm going to keep looking. And so the students stop listening to each other and they're just like, am I getting the right response from the teacher when I give this answer? And that is totally far less productive than what I saw at Acton, where they make them sit in a circle, they put out a question, and then pretty quickly it's just a ping pong between the students. I agree or disagree, and here's why. You have ground rules, you have respect, but the teacher really steps back unless they just feel like they have to get things going, or if it's really getting off track or something like that. Occasionally bringing out shy people, but what I saw at Acton is, since they do it 10 minutes 3 times a day, 10 or 15 minutes, eventually there will be a topic that will pull out the shy students. They'll like, wait, I really have an opinion on this and I'm going to get it out here. And they will come out of their shell when the right topic comes along. I think that probably also helps, which is trying to occasionally, even if, let's say, you're running a history or a civics class, bringing in current topics instead of all, let's keep talking about the war, the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, because kids are just not going to have opinions. I mean, some will, some won't, but on the Civil War in the way they do about whatever currently is going on in the world. But you can get that debate going and then ease it into, whatever the content topic is. But I really like Samuel's point about, like, if you're playing a game of just trying to get approval for the right answer from the teacher, that's not a productive voice dialogue, a Socratic dialogue in the classic sense. And then also, I think that the circle, the tests in a circle, I think that makes a difference. When they're all pointed forward, I mean, immediately it's like, okay, I'm throwing answers at a teacher and seeing if I get approval or disapproval. You put them in a circle, it really changes the dynamic.
If I can, I want to jump in for a second because Tori hit on, as usual, a lot of good points. The thing that you were focused on, like at the end, about it being in a circle, that was actually something that we were going to ask you guys too. It's like, when you're trying to amplify student voice, does it matter how you were trying to do it? And I think what you were talking about is changing the dynamics of the layout of the classroom. When you are really trying to foster those kind of discussions, it sets the tone of the mindset. Like, if your desks are normally in rows, when the kids come in, or when you have them during like a transitional period, okay, help me move these desks. They're like, holy crap, like, what's going on now? And so instead of just asking the question and, like you said, waiting for an answer, whether you're looking for the quote unquote right one or not, when you move those seats and you move those desks or you change the environment, it automatically alerts them, like they're on notice. Okay, this is different. And I do think when you talk about current events, I like to talk about controversial stuff. I just do. I mean, that was the way I grew up in my house, and I'm a firm believer that kids do what they're taught. So the way that my parents taught me, we didn't shy away from difficult topics. And I'll just say, the elephant in the room, as a minority woman, we talked about a lot of difficult topics in my house. So the thing that got me a couple of years ago was, like, a lot of my students, I'm hoping they were pretending as a science teacher that they were flat earthers, but they did that on purpose in science class. They would always ask me, Miss Jackson, is the earth flat? And I would look at them and I say, well, based on what you learned, what do you think? And then they'd be like, wait, you think the earth might be flat? And then all of a sudden we had this whole conversation. And for me, it's about, okay, well, why do you support it? So I'm that teacher where I don't, I hate standardized tests. First, because I suck at them. And so personally, I know that they don't always um, show what students know. So my students never believe me until they took a test from me. You can give me an answer. The only way you're going to get it wrong is if you don't back it up. And so, for when they were talking about flat earth, okay, great. Why do you think that? And then, so, well, what about the pictures that we got from space missions, or when you are looking out on the horizon, why does it look like it curves? And if it's a flat earth, wouldn't somebody have fallen off by now? And those kind of questions. If they have an answer, I'm like, okay, Let's see. And then some of the other kids in the class, they're laughing. They're like, Miss Jackson, why are you doing that? I'm saying, hey, they're giving me answers. Let's see how we can go. And then because of that conversation, even though, they were messing with me because it's kids that do that. Now, when we talk about other stuff that they actually believe in, now they understand the process and they're really going to support it. And so you are modeling that kind of behavior that they want, or that you want in the class. You don't want them just to believe it because you said it. I mean, the best thing about smart people is that you realize you don't know everything. And so you want to model that kind of posture and that kind of thing for students as well. Does anybody else have an experience similar to that?
Well, I just want to add that what you're talking about with that changing of environment, like back to Samuel's point, is that you're breaking the power dynamic. And so it's interesting. And I'm the history teacher, but I would change the way that my door looked if kids were coming into a simulation. Like when they needed to figure out the Great Compromise and all I was handing them was a census, they had to walk through like a time machine and come into the classroom. So like it changes, so they know that they're coming into something different. But even Roz and I, if we showed you pictures of our classroom, they look nothing like a traditional classroom. It's the children's space, not our space. It's not filled with pictures of us and our families. It's not filled with the posters that we like. I'm not working out of Pinterest all summer to try to put together the kind of classroom that I want. It's bare, it's empty, and it gets filled in by students. So, it's just a different feeling when you come into that room too. That also breaks that power dynamic where the kids are like, why didn't you decorate for me? Kids have asked me that. I'm like, it's not my space to decorate. It's real, it's yours. And that changes, again, back to Samuel's point, that power dynamic is you're not here to be a trained SEAL for me. You're here to be an equal to me, and we are having a conversation together. And I'm not here to approve or disapprove of you. I'm here to model and scaffold skills that I want you to be able to bring outside of the classroom.
Building on the power dynamic piece, like one of the cool things I saw again in the active Socratic dialogues, instead of the typical model of like student does something, teacher assesses it and gives them a grade, by doing this sort of internal debate, they just naturally learn, ooh, I made a bad argument and somebody cut me down, or I saw somebody else make a bad argument and they got cut down. And that's by far the strongest feedback you can get. Teacher doesn't have to do anything. No assessment time, no grading, no, it's just let them naturally play out the debate and they will learn over time. This is what good critical thinking looks like, and this is what bad critical or logical thinking looks like. One other piece on the voice. I'm old enough. I went to high school where there was absolutely no voice and choice of any kind. And I remember, this is why this memory sticks out. One project, the English teacher said, you can pick your own book to do, a book report. And instead of just like, I'm going to assign you Hamlet or whatever. Now she did give us a list, but then I showed her this copy of Catcher in the Rye I had found in my parents' house. I was like, can I do this? And she's like, well, that's not on the district approved list, but she's like, I'll let you do it. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And that was the funnest book and book report I ever did in high school because it was subversive, right? Like it was a banned book that I was being allowed to read and do for class. And so when you could give your students that kind of voice, that kind of like they can kind of pick what they want to do within a certain realm, rather than just like, here's the assignment. I think that has a lot of power too.
I do think you also hit on something, Tori, again about because some of the stuff that we talk about when we amplify student voice, I think a lot of educators from administration on down, we miss the importance of how we're trying to amplify student voice. When you're amplifying student voice, it's not just from the perspective of the teacher necessarily telling you that you have choice. That's one part, right? But how are you modeling that choice? And I do think like how you talked about the discussion where the teacher literally shuts up and lets the students kind of critique each other. That's another way you can do it. I think definitely because we're all about actionable steps, Jessica and I. It's like, okay, this is a great discussion, but how can you do that? Giving the students a list of choice of how they can do it. You can choose your own book. You can choose your own project. You can choose the different type of media of how you want to do this, but it's still my idea, but they're choosing how they're going to do it. But now when you input what you were talking about, where you have, Socratic type of method among the students, or you have what's called like a Harkness discussion and they're doing that, you're out of the way. And then the students are actually critiquing each other. And when I found in my personal experience, when I have been smart enough to get out of the way and then let them critique each other, what they say to each other is way more profound than anything I was going to say, because I don't know whether it's because sometimes, yes, as an educator, you're a little bit scared of what to say sometimes, especially depending on the environment within which you are working. Um, but the kids are brutal, man.
It's a brutal man. I just want to say, or what they will say as a
Yeah.
teacher that teaches current events. I
Yeah.
have blindsided some days, and it is hard to be like, I'm going to finish this period and still have a job, because
Exactly.
sometimes, you know, if you let them pick the news is for all ages.
But the cool thing about that is, and Jessica, definitely with you with current events, I mean, it's there, but it's like you also kind of have that thing where if you're letting them do it, you have a little more, I guess, rope to hang yourself with, because you can kind of ask for forgiveness and not permission. It's like, hey, we started with this question and they went here. And once I heard it, we kind of calm it down. But most times the kids are, when they are passionate about it, as long as you have set those ground rules, like how you said at the beginning, where we can disagree, but it must be respectful. Everybody is heard. The stuff that comes out of their mouths is very profound, even if they are completely opposed to each other. When you say that it has to be grounded in facts, not emotion, that the arguments that they're doing are not personal. They cannot be personal attacks. What is your support for this? And when you talk about, like how I was saying before, if we're talking about flat earth stuff, or we're talking about stuff that most of the kids in the class, they're doing it to rib you a little bit, but those kind of things model the kind of behavior when you are able to get to those more serious conversations where it really affects or has affected somebody personally in their life. If you are talking about stuff that really adults don't do a great job of talking about, but the students handle it so much more maturely. It is amazing. And that is another way of, I have found, of how you can amplify that student voice. Does anybody else have any ideas on that?
Well, I'll just jump in here. Wow, so many great ideas already. Like, I can't even touch on each one of these things. I just don't even know where to go with it in a way. But Roz, you did just mention the Socratic method, building off what Tori, that's what was coming to mind for me as well, is, you know, asking the students for their perspectives, and then not always being so hung up on a right or wrong answer, because then that creates a lot of judgment. Now, of course, there are right and wrong, like 2 + 2 is 4, and, there's an answer. But if you can, but even around math, where there are, hard, objective, right and wrong, you can still have conversations and elicit their perspectives. And as soon as there's not a right and wrong answer, and we're just asking for perspectives, opinions, support it, and have that dialogue back and forth, Socratic method way, and just, that's when, it seems like they get more and more engaged, and it's personal to them, it matters to them. But like you said, doing it respectfully, doing it in a way that's not bringing in shame or judgment, and I think even what can go even a step further, so that people feel heard, because I think that's a lot of what this voice is about, is feeling heard and seen, is maybe even teaching some acknowledgement and validation. So when somebody, like, let's say they're having a hard debate, and you're, in the background, of course, they're having a hard debate, but when somebody shares something, to acknowledge that, and then a step further to validate it, if they feel really, strong about this, validate that feeling behind whatever they're sharing, they're going to feel extra heard, which then they feel like, wow, I have a voice. But I love how you guys were going into other directions about voice. Like Jessica was talking about setting up your room. That's another way. It doesn't always have to be an auditory or vocal voice, right? It can be with the images and pictures and whatever the room is being set up. It can be written, when everyone has a chance to write something out and share that amongst the group. Now everyone can participate, especially the shyer people, like Tori was talking about. it might be difficult to speak up, for fear of shame or judgment or rejection in some way. But if we're just sharing in writing, it might be that much easier. And one last thing, I just want to build on what Tori was saying about the circle. I've noticed in the corporate world, when I was running lots of brainstorming sessions with surgeons, because I'm not an educator, I'm not in the classroom, I'm nothing in education. I just love it. But in working with surgeons, I found that when I can bring them in a circle, like if we're having a big brainstorming development meeting or something, and I've got like 8 surgeons, and I found that more than 8, it's too many. So a smaller group, and less than 4, you don't get enough different like diversity of opinion. But you bring them in a circle. But I also found that the closer they are physically, like I literally asked our event planners, when they schedule the room at the hotel, get a smaller room so we're almost touching shoulders, and the amount of engagement just goes up like a whole nother level. So even that physical proximity can take it to another level. So I'll stop there.
Sorry, I was on mute. That is such a great tip. I never thought about that before, because the circle, that visual is cool, but you're right. It's almost like how we talk about people now being online with social media. You're a lot more brave when you feel safer and disconnected, kind of thing. Um and it's a lot easier to be a keyboard warrior when you're not in somebody's face, but when you're right there and you're right next to someone, and you're like, holy crap, are they going to smack me if I say this? Let me kind of use my filter here and be more respectful, because I'm, like you said, you're shoulder to shoulder with someone. So you're going to be a lot less likely to say, wow, that was an idiotic statement. You're going to be like, well, I agree with this part, but have you thought about this? So no, that's an excellent point. I'm sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
And I just wanted to point out, that's like your middle schooler that comes back and sits in the back row. Or like me, when I go to a professional development and I'm in the back row of the auditorium, it's because I'm putting space in between me and you. And so your students are putting space in between them and you. And so, when you close that dynamic, you're bringing everyone in, and you might be pulling, honestly, really pulling. But it closes that gap of separation that you're able to put in. So they might sit there with their arms crossed, but slowly that's those physical features that we become attuned to. We have learned about in our field, but you could, and to Kevin's point, you can observe in any field, is that when they don't want to talk to you, they're standing in the back, their arms are crossed. Those are the kinds of things that you can tell. So that closeness and that circle idea, really, it breaks down those barriers that are harder to overcome just with language. So that was really thought-provoking. Thank you.
It signals that you are not an observer, you are a participant. Like, it's the same as being around a lunch table where you definitely feel like you're a participant, versus I'm in the back, like you said, the back of the lecture hall, like I'm here just to watch what happens. And if you put them tighter together, you get more of that lunch table feel and less of that, lecture hall feel.
I want to add as a, I'm sorry, Roz, what do you want to add? Okay, so as a tip, my first year teaching, this is probably why I turned out the way that I am, is I grew up in New York in the suburbs. I was hired in East Harlem to work in a school, Title I school. But what was uniquely amazing about this school was it was called a nest school. And in this school, they offered this program with students that were on the autism spectrum. And there was 4 students that were somewhere on that spectrum per classroom. There was 2 teachers per classroom. And the idea was that your students that were on the spectrum would learn from your typical kids in terms of socialization, and your typical kids would learn from your students on the spectrum, about how to be leaders and how to work together and how to value each other's strengths and weaknesses. So it was this amazing experience, which really brought to like, what is the purpose of learning? Like, does everyone need to fill out a test the same way? Or can your kids tell you when it's okay? So it really broke me into being a different kind of educator. But one of the training courses we had to go through was how to use declarative language. And so because your students that were on the spectrum might not be thinking in the typical pathway that other students are thinking. You kind of need to model it out. So when you're in your classroom, you're always, today I'm going to do this. How would I do this? How would I walk through these steps? If I need to find my textbook, where would I find my textbook? This declarative kind of language that you're using. And I find that became part of me after a year, but that is the kind of thing that gives student choice too, because you're walking through and you're thinking through these steps, you're modeling how you're thinking through these steps, and then the students start to respond to you. So even it doesn't matter if you're teaching 5th graders or 12th graders, when you start walking through and using declarative language, they catch on and start to voice out their opinions too. So then they're like, well, if I was going to solve this problem, I would do this, this, and this. And so it's a really, it's a small change in how you speak, because you're not giving directions. You're asking for feedback all the time. You're walking through even the small parts of your day. But it really opens up and breaks, again, coming back. Sorry, Samuel, constantly pulling you in. Back to that first part with like that breaking of what you expect. I'm not saying go get your textbook, open to page 100. I'm saying if I wanted to learn about this, what is a resource I could use? How would I go about finding this? Where would I look for this? And then it becomes part of this dialogue. And it's just the smallest change. So when we're talking about, and we're really, Roz and I really are big on these just tiny changes that are not going to stress out teachers anymore, but that change the function of a classroom. And that's one of the biggest ones. And one of the best ones I got from the NEST program. Shout out NEST program. Hi, guys. It so fundamentally changes the way that you communicate with others.
Go ahead.
I was going to say on the declarative statements in the acted Socratic dialogues, 2 things. One is they usually kick it off with it's a pure binary choice. So he'll start with the question of which is more important, compassion or accountability, and then you put it out, and the students are required to start with, well, the first one gets to make a statement, but then everybody else has to say, I agree or disagree, and here's why. And by making that declarative, I agree or disagree, you're immediately creating kind of this. You sharpen the debate, and you, instead of just people meandering around their kind of thoughts on the topic of compassion or accountability, like you by just putting those little things in the conversation, it really builds the critical thinking skills and the debate skills and the voice. Sorry, Roz, go ahead.
No, it's Tori, I will always defer to you because you're amazing. But what I wanted to talk about is that something that Jessica hinted at when you are asking the students, like, how would you do this? Or how could I do this if this is what I wanted to do? To me, that's like the most powerful thing to do in the classroom. And I suck at remembering to do it. So something that I try to remember to do is to not say no. So if my students, when we are talking about things, I hope, and my mission is always to encourage them to try new things, to see what they can come up with. And I don't always remember to use that language like Jessica's doing, because sometimes I get in my own head and I'm going so fast, and I'm so excited about the project and I see them excited and I forget to kind of slow down and ask them. But when they come up to me, and after I've given them some options, and I always try to remember to say, this is not an exhaustive list. What else can you come up with? And that's kind of like my general thing. And then wait and give them a few seconds to do this. And usually after you kind of give like your 5-minute thing, and then they're off and you're having them think about it, and then it's like silence, and you're like, wait, did I totally break their brains? Did I freak them out too much? And then you hear like this slow hum, and they start talking to the people next to them. And then it gets louder, and I'm like, okay, this is my happy place. I'm thinking about it now. But then that one student in the back, or the one who's always quiet, they come up to you, or they raise their hand, and they're like, but Miss Jackson, can I do it this way? And then my question always to them is, why not? Let's try it. Let's see. And so even if you kind of are like me and you get so excited and you forget to ask those questions, when you just wait and let them do it and try not to solve it for them, most times they will come up with that. And the only caveat I give them is, as long as it doesn't get me fired and it doesn't blow up the school, let's see how it works. And if it doesn't, great. We're in science class. We found out something. We found out one way this doesn't work, but now we get to do more experiments. That's the cool thing about science class. So, and then they're like, "You're crazy." I'm like, "Yeah, but let's keep having fun. Let's go for it." So, that's one of the ways that I try to do it, but I know there are better ways out there. And so that's what kind of we wanted to focus on today. So if you guys have other ideas that you tried, keep sharing, please.
Well, I don't know if there's better ways, but there's certainly other ways, right? Yeah, I love what you were saying there. What I'm hearing is, okay, and again, I'm not in the school, I'm not in the classroom, right? But it seems like if things can slow down enough, because you talked about pausing like several different times, you mentioned that, and and this is, I think, one of the frustrations with education is there's so many demands and there's so much content you have to get through, and you want to go and go and go, and instead of like, where might I find this, resource or this information, just say, no, go to this book and that page, and there you go, and now we can move on. But so I don't have an answer to this, but how can a teacher and how can the administration understand this, that things need to slow down, or it sounds like, things need to slow down so that you can have that space to allow people to think and process and explore and discover and interact and engage. How do we get that time? How do we slow things down?
That is the key question. That is the question that most teachers are asking, is because the curriculum's written by people not in the classroom. It's written by textbook companies that are giving out money to politicians that are approving it so that the budgets keep going. Teachers unions are involved, blah, blah, blah. It's a whole messy thing. I'm not placing blame. It's a bureaucratic mess. So there's no one person. But then it comes to the shoulders of the teacher. And so like my baseline course that I started teaching right out of high school was explorers to Reconstruction. I was supposed to teach European explorers like Magellan, Columbus, 1492, up to Reconstruction, up to 1900. I was supposed to cover all that in a year. I did not cover all that in a year. One of the key things that I came up with was, many of us have state tests, is like looking at what are the big things. And so we kind of call these like the big ideas, summing down what are the must knows, and then what can you sprinkle throughout. So everything can't be the most important thing. You have to kind of look through and say, okay, so this is important and this is important. Is every single battle of the Revolutionary War important? No, to someone they are. And when you have time, look into them, and here are the resources to look at them. But what you really need to know is the ground tactics and the movement of technology and what it means to have allies. Like, this is the big idea of a Revolutionary War, so that's what you need to concentrate on. And then, can you have a conversation about this? Can you have a conversation about that? Can you find a little podcast about this? Like, hey, did you want to learn about, this battle? Sure, that stuff can come through, but you really have to lose the idea that everything is important. You have to say, like, this is the outcome I'm looking for. Being a social studies teacher or a history teacher was like, my question always came down to, does it make you a citizen of the world? Like, you need to know the cause and effect relationship of this. You don't need to know every little part of it, but you need to be able to go to a cocktail party when you're 25 and somebody says like the Battle of Yorktown, and you're not like, where's Yorktown? Like there's just fundamental things you need to know, so like that's kind of how I always sorted it out. Do you have a different way of doing it, Roz? I feel like mine I just go like, if
Let me say this. I'm sorry, because I think we lost your Wi-Fi for a second. Can everybody hear me still?
I can hear you. Jessica cut
Okay.
out there though.
All right, perfect. So Jess, when you're done, you can come back and finish that. I think every
Sorry.
teacher. Oh, okay.
Oh, I was thinking, do you remember jaywalking, like back in the day with Jay Leno, where he would go out and ask people on the street, like, where's
Yeah.
we the people from? And they'd be like, I don't know, the Gettysburg Address. Like, that's what, like, that was my litmus test of like, I need to teach this so that you don't get caught on jaywalking. And you can't be like, Cavallero was my teacher and she never taught me. That's my litmus test.
Like
So
that's the mission in life as an educator. But no, and I think this is part of exactly, Kevin. This is, I think, part of another question we wanted to ask too, like how do we amplify that student voice? You know what I mean? And what they want to learn. And part of that is the bottom line is as an educator, yes, we all have bureaucratic red tape that we have to go through. So you're making choices. Some of that is what we are interested in. I'm a science geek. Luckily for me, I literally like every part of science. And then physics to me is like, do I have to teach it? But yes, I do. So we sprinkle it in there. But what I think what you try to improve upon every year is not to do your own pet projects. Okay. So that's the one of the small steps that I'm trying to make. So if I know that I love space, or if I know that I love the body systems, or if I know that I love how to build rockets. My thing is, I don't want to show them, oh, this is the coolest project that I found. We're talking about space. Great. So, what big ideas can I ask them about space that I know as an adult that's 46, that's been teaching for about 18 years? Is this idea big enough that they can come up with their own? And if I love body systems, great. What things have we seen in the news or that I have learned about or that might be affecting them in the community that I'm teaching right now? What things, what big idea or question or questions can I come up with where they can come up with things or problems to solve on their own? So, yes, it might be something I'm interested in, but what if it's not? What if it's something that I pulled from the news and asked them, what do you think about this? Because a lot of times I'm planning like months ahead about questions because I know that I have to do the body systems in March. I might just pull out a question and say, hey, guys, what did you think about this? And then depending on the answers that I'm like, okay, now I know what my big idea is going to be. So sometimes you're planning ahead too. And it's honestly, yes, pun intended, it's not rocket science. It's just, you know what? I am trying to keep them interested. I know that I have to cover these things. So we know from August what we have to do from August until June. And if I know these things are coming up, I am collecting articles, I'm collecting ideas, I'm looking at YouTube videos, I'm talking to different people, I'm looking at stuff on LinkedIn or Facebook and just collecting these different things to see what is going to stick and what can possibly engage these kids, but where there's not just an answer, where they don't Google it and have the answer in 5 minutes. It's like, no, and they might think this or they might think that. And the ones that I love are where I don't agree with it. Those are awesome because if I'm triggered by it, oh, those kids are going to be in every single direction. And then I know that they're going to be engaged. And for the schools and administrators that claim to love educators and teachers, but always it boils down to classroom management. The key to classroom management is those kids can't be bored. If you got them with a good question or a good project, they're going to be on board with what you're doing. You don't have to quote unquote manage it. And so a lot of amplifying their learning and amplifying their voices, that solves so many other issues. It really does about what they're going to learn on a test, how engaged they are in class, how they are collaborating with others, their own mental health. Because if you know that you have issues at home, you have issues with a parent or a sibling or something, or issues with another teacher that you don't get along with, you know, when you come in my class, you are going to be so engaged with what you're doing. And then I'm going to care about what you are thinking about for the space of whether you're on block or not for about 40 to 60 minutes. I got you. And you can just relax and do your thing. And that's the goal. And I'm sorry I got on my soapbox.
That was awesome. So I think I wrote down two items that might be some of the how do we help increase student voice. One was what you were talking about earlier on your soapbox was, that was awesome. I love hearing soapboxes personally. Is if the teacher is able to challenge themselves, and not, so instead of just doing the projects like about space or about the body systems that you really like, challenge yourself to go outside of your comfort zone. So you go into your stretch zone, and then that curiosity of your own, I think it tends to be contagious, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so that's one. So teachers challenging themselves, and the second is building on what Jessica said. You mentioned podcasts as another way of learning about something, and that sparked in my brain asynchronous learning. Does all the learning have to occur within the walls of the school building and the hours of, whatever, 8 to 3, or I don't know what the hours are? Is that the only time that learning can happen? No. Find a podcast. Oh, Samuel, cool. Find a podcast, have a discussion, somehow, with, gosh, you can reach out to educators at universities and whatnot, and get that going, and then report back to the class and give that student 3 or 4 minutes to report what they found, and share, and then, wow, I can go and do this and that. The other students see that, and then they go on. So I think one of the challenges of school is that it's like, it's in school, that's the learning, you do the work, you get the grade, and you move on. But and this goes back to a couple of calls you had a couple of weeks ago. Like, what is education really about? And education doesn't stop at 3 o'clock or whatever. It's always. I mean, the only reason I'm even here having this conversation with you guys is because I've been digging into this stuff for 20 years on my own, and it's not because I went to school for it. I'm just so interested in it. It matters to me. So then I get involved, and that's all on my own time, asynchronous. So that was the second one.
What you're saying there, Kevin, I think that's sort of similar to the flipped classroom, where you ask the kids to watch the video outside of class and then come in and keep the class around discussion. But I want to link that back to what Jessica said about curating the big ideas and not trying to cover every battle, for instance. And this is the flaw I saw in the Summit charter model. They do these playlists of content that the kids have to work their way through on their own time. It is asynchronous. But then you get this really dangerous temptation, and I saw it out of control there, where it's like, well, sure, let's make them watch another video on this battle. Oh yeah, we can throw in a Wikipedia page on that battle. Like, just have them read everything, have them watch everything, and you stress them out, and they can't see the forest for the trees, so to speak, because you've loaded up their playlists with every little thing. You really have to be, I think, almost painfully curating around, like, look, these are the essential concepts they need to get out of the whole Revolutionary War. And so, like, let's just make sure that those come out and they have great discussions and have time on that, and then not load them down with a bunch of detail that honestly they're going to forget in 6 weeks anyway. So why are you making them memorize battles?
I would say that. Oh, sorry, Roz, go.
No, really quick. I promise not to get on the soapbox again, but I do think that's an excellent point. And what Jessica and I are cognizant of a lot is that when we talk about using Agile in the classroom, it seems like it is a free-for-all. It seems that way, but good educators make it seem that way. So that there is this overarching umbrella where you want them to get these main things, and how they get those things is up to them. But because you are doing constant feedback, constant check-ins, you're going around to the different teams, you're talking to the kids, whether it's asynchronous or not, because Kevin is right. A part of that is asynchronous. Not all kids are operating with full cylinders at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm not. And my first period, it was a joke where we used to laugh. They were like, "Miss Jackson, we know you're not up yet." I said, "No, guys, I'm not up until 11. So I'm sorry. I'm doing as fast as I can. And I'm not a coffee drinker either. So it is rough." But the kids knew that, and we were cool enough that they'd be like, they would, we joke about it. But the thing is, you have to have all of those different elements and pieces for that whole system to work. And you're right. You can't just say, oh, let's throw all the kitchen sink at them. And then you can't let kids have a total free for all either. So as you are doing that constant feedback loop, you're checking in with them and they are talking to you and there are other group members and students. Well, why does this matter? Well, is that appropriate here? And so they are constantly pruning some of the resources they are finding as well. So you can't just say, okay, go forth and prosper, and then come back and do this project at the end. It is a continuous type of process, and you're building something towards either a solution or an answer or a design or whatever it is that they have decided to do. You're building that organically together.
Good pro tip, Tori. Tori sources caffeine pills. That reminds me of Jesse Spano in Saved by the Bell. Do you guys remember that? Like, I'm so excited. Okay, sorry.
I accidentally sent that just to you, Jessica. I need to send that out. I didn't realize I was doing that. There we go. There it goes. All right. No, I am. Yeah, I don't drink coffee. I don't like the taste of coffee either. But 200 milligram caffeine tablets. It's the equivalent of a Starbucks. Man, it'll get you going. And it costs like 10 cents. So it's a lot cheaper than Starbucks too.
That's your actionable teacher's tip from this.
Caffeine tablets. Yeah, no, you'll feel it. It's a great boost. It gets you. I'll be honest. Ever since I sort of discovered them, I now understand why tea was such a big deal in the Revolutionary War. I never understood that as a kid. I was like, why the hell does anybody care about taxes on tea? That was the only source of caffeine, and that's what like drove the whole economy was people, getting pumped up on tea and like
it's cold and there's no heat and you have to go to the bathroom outside. Like life's not awesome in the 1700s. You gotta have something.
You got to have something, and tea was basically sort of the that and beer. I'm sure it was sort of the narcotic of choice. Depending on day or night. So that's why the tea is such a big deal, the Boston Tea Party. Makes
Absolutely. Sense. So I just wanted to, and I know we're running into time, but part of our Agile framework, and this is the kind of stuff that Roz and I have been working on, and figuring out why our classrooms run the way that they do. And this comes back into our discussion so much is that, we don't use essential questions. We use what we call wide open questions because they're not tied to content. So when I'm asking a question about, social contract theory, and I'm asking how should power be distributed in a society, you can go anywhere with that. And that's okay. But what you have to do is you have to, read A, B, and C and listen to this podcast. And then you need to loop it back around. So you need to take that question, find a solution, but then loop it back around to the content. So, it allows the kids choice and voice is because they can say, well, a power dynamic in my life looks like this, or a power dynamic in my community looks like this. And it's going to be different from the kid next to them. And so that allows that voice because you're not saying, what were the causes of the Revolutionary War? Everyone's having the same one. So as much as you're like, well, it's an open-ended question. Well, no, because they have 7 different options. They're just going to scramble them up. So when you do wide open questions, how does system design, break up power? That's what I did for the Constitution. So how is the design of a system ensuring that power does not accumulate somewhere? That is a huge question. And it does seem over their head. But first of all, it's not Googleable. So, everyone wants to complain that their kids are cheating. Try an authentic assessment. Just don't give them Googleable answers. Another part is purpose. And so the big thing I heard from you, Tori, was with the playlist is that it covers it. You could say it's hitting standards, or you could say the Battle of Monmouth was so epic, but no, it wasn't. None of us know that battle. Not one of us, except the people that live in Monmouth. Okay. So you don't everything needs to be purposeful. If I can't say you need to read this excerpt of 2 Treatises of Government from John Locke because it'll help you unlock this question, then why are you reading it? So I think I'm just a very tall middle schooler at this point because I'm constantly going, do I need to know this? Do I really? And so if I can't say I need to know this to answer this question, then you don't need to know this to answer this question. So 2 really big things about Agile are that wide open question and that purposefulness. And then, the last part, and we showed it at different points in the show, is that Kanban board, is that, when They have to put the work out. They have to plan ahead. They have to work together. They're developing all those soft skills. They're developing empathy, collaboration, teamwork. All of those things work together, and then they're all bringing in their own schema and their background knowledge, and they're putting it visually on a board, and they're working through it. So, it gives them that choice of, what am I going to pull now? What am I going to pull next? And I think what we're all kind of coming around to when I'm hearing Kevin and saying like a flipped classroom model, and Tori with the purposefulness, is it's pull-based learning. And yes, Tori, I know I need a better term than that. And believe me, I've been trying, but I don't know what to say to you. I don't know. But it's pull-based learning. It's you're pulling, and Kevin, that's what you're talking about. You started out in life doing a different career. You pulled learning about education to yourself because it was interesting to you. And because you're an intrinsic learner, like everyone is, you pull the information that you find relevant. Why would we treat children in a different way? They're not a different species. They're just tinier. That doesn't invalidate them.
I have no trouble with pull-based learning. It was the agile that I think is not clicking with teachers.
I don't think either is. So I'm up for criticism. You throw it at me, I'll pull criticism.
No, it's just the agile term is something businesses want, but teachers hear the word agile, and I don't think. I mean, you guys are teachers, but I don't think that immediately clicks. Like, yeah, that's something I need. I need more agility in my classroom. Like, no, I think there's probably 10 other words that would grab their attention more. But yeah, I could use that in my classroom.
No, I definitely hear your feedback. I am working on it.
No, you are definitely, you're not wrong. And it's almost like sometimes I feel that, how we say the students are like small adults, then sometimes we need to break down these big kind of industry terms for adults and meet them where they are too. Because adults are bogged down with bureaucratic red tape and stuff that we have to meet, guidelines we have to meet. We have our lives and our children at school because they do become ours, and our lives and our children at home. And it's like, no, I don't want another thing. What's this new term now? Is this the same thing is it the same as PBL? Is it the same as UDL? Is it this Common Core? Oh my God, this is another thing we have to do. So yes, you are correct. We have to, the same way that we break down things for students, we also have to think about how we are presenting it to the people that we're trying to help, because other teachers are, quote unquote, our learners, and our clients are users as well. And so we want them to have, for lack of a better term, a good user experience too. So we want to make sure that they're doing the right stuff, and we are doing the right stuff to be able to help them. Because if they don't get it, they're not getting the help that they need, just like our students. So we can't just tell the students, yes, you have to learn this just because it's great. That is what we're trying not to do. So we have to model that with adults as well. You're 100% correct. Yep. But I know that we are almost at our time. Is there anyone that has any final comments before we let you go back to the chaos of preparing for Thanksgiving? You can't use us to hide from your families. That's not going to work.
Thanks, Roz. Thank you guys for joining us. We always appreciate your conversation, always bringing unique perspectives in. We cannot tell you how much we appreciate you coming and spending time with us. We will have this up and posted on Spotify and LinkedIn within the next week, so we can grab little nuggets of information out of it. And thank you for joining. We are thankful for you that you actually come and talk to us. So thank you. And we hope you have a great time with your family, a relaxing time with your family. And, if you need to run away, you find a book, that's always good. Putting the book up in front of your face, like that might be helpful. There's a tip. But thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you. We hope you have a great holiday, and we'll see you in December.
If you like this discussion, join us for the next one on December the 7th at 12:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.